Hi, everyone. My name is Sara Winick, and today I'm joined by Curtis Smith for this edition of Brown Bag Lit's interview series, Lattes Lit. In today's interview, I'm going to be talking with Curtis, who is an author with multiple published works in fiction, essays, creative nonfiction, and flash fiction. To get more interviews and content like Lattes Lit, make sure to subscribe to our channel by hitting the subscribe button below and click the link in our bio to get more events and information from Brown Bag Lit. So, Curtis, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Just to start off today's interview, I wanted to ask you, you've had quite the career and a number of published literary works. Have you always known that you've wanted to be a writer? Was there like a specific event or work that drew you towards writing?
Well, that's a good question. I talk to my students, a lot about the paths that we take, and I think there are some people who know from the get-go they want to be, a writer. And that was not me. I wanted to be creative. When I went to college, I found myself surrounded by creative people and in high school, but I never really had an outlet. So, I didn't start writing until my later 20s, maybe like 28 or so. And
Mhm.
until then, there were a number of, failed attempts at other things. Um, some of them might have been more practical than writing, but I'm glad I settled on something that eventually, fit my mindset and my way of being creative.
Yeah, absolutely. I also wanted to note in your bio with Press 53, you've crafted and published writing ranging from creative nonfiction to flash fiction and a little bit in between. As time has gone on, do you find that you kind of gravitate towards one form of writing over the other? Is it something you're always kind of bouncing between?
Um, I'd say maybe the first third of my career was all fiction. I never really thought of myself um, as a creative nonfiction person. But that changed. There was a literary magazine I really wanted to get into, and I couldn't get into it with my fiction, and they were running a special nonfiction issue. And I guess in like 2004 or so, I started writing essays. And I tend to write essays and nonfiction kind of in these clumps in between other projects. And I would balance them. I think when I started writing creative nonfiction, it was a real, uh, demarcation in my career. My style changed greatly, I think, when I discovered my creative nonfiction voice. That said, I'm not really working on creative nonfiction recently. I wrote two essay collections. Published a bunch of essays in these two spurts, and I had this opportunity to write a creative nonfiction book. And I'm not, you know, close to the idea of another creative nonfiction project. I just don't know what it would be right now. So the door's open, and I enjoyed doing it. It was harder for me than fiction, for sure. But I think coming into it with a fiction writer's toolbox, made it kind of easier for me than if I had started, flat out with creative nonfiction early on.
Yeah, definitely. You kind of touched on my next question, getting into some of your published works. You just published The Lost and the Blind in September of 2023. In the description, the novel is described as a searing portrait of dope-sick small-town America and a young man desperate to rise above. Were there any real-life events or instances that kind of drove you toward this story and depicting small-town America? Because it's not like a easy thing, I'd imagine, to kind of capture in one book.
I grew up in the Philly area, and after I graduated from high school, from college in like the early 80s, I came to the central part of the state, and I I taught high school here for 30 plus years before retiring from that job. Um, and I think a lot of the fiction I write is kind of centered in this part of the state, more rural, the places that have been kind of looked over as jobs go elsewhere, and other things, kind of creep in, and one of which is, addiction. So I find myself gravitating a lot toward, this kind of locale. And I don't really name these cities, but they're all kind of the same in my mind. So I have a, I didn't grow up in a place like that, but I feel like I've come to know, these sort of places as I've gotten older.
Yeah, definitely. Also, kind of going into my next question. So, for Lost in the Blind specifically, you have that kind of inspiration. When it comes to generally like looking at your writing overall, where do you feel like most of your inspiration comes from? Is it from events in your own life? Is it from reading other works? Or is it just kind of a little bit of everything?
It's definitely not my own life. My own life is pretty boring. I write a lot, I work a lot. I think a lot of it just comes with, getting an idea and letting it kick around for a while and seeing, who comes out of it and, what they want to do. Um, I don't know if I can really pinpoint, where this one came from. My last novel, I can pinpoint, but again, it followed once I, knew where it started, it followed its own kind of trajectory. Um, I am a real planner when it comes to, the process, but there's always, an open door, for the story to, kind of speak up for itself and go where it wants to go. And that usually happens too along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And I know you said that creative nonfiction might not be where you're going next, but do you have any projects right now that you're working on or that you can tell us a little bit about and kind of where you want to go following The Lost in the Blind?
So my next novel is signed and we're done with edits. So, it used to take me like 5 years or so to write a novel, but past couple of years I've been kind of in the groove with it. And um, so I've been about a year and a half to 2 years from beginning to end of a novel. So that novel is called Deaf Heaven, and that will be out. I don't know when, maybe probably 2025, early 2025. The edits are done. I'm just waiting on that. And I'm halfway done with the draft of a new novel. And
Mhm.
so in between, I publish stories here and there, and I'll usually write like a cycle of stories, like 4 or 5, 6 stories, and send them out and hope they find a home somewhere. But my long-term projects do seem to be, in the novel realm right now. I feel kind of comfortable with that process.
Yeah, I was also wanted to ask, so throughout the course of your career, I mean, you were in so much and published so much. I know you mentioned before coming into like writing other genres with like a fiction writer's toolbox has been helpful. If you had to pinpoint, or I guess if there's, it can be more than one invaluable lesson or piece of advice that you've gained about, writing, publishing, editing, the writing process, anything like that, just throughout your time.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
I, I,
it's a big
I
question.
would say the willingness to try different things.
Mhm.
When I first started writing, I was just writing like these, 1, 2, 3 page stories. And, not to sound like an old guy, but back then we didn't have the term flash fiction. We just would call it, there are all these different terms. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do anything else. But as time went on, I started writing longer stories, and then I wanted to write a novel, and my first, novel went nowhere, and it took a while. And then I started writing nonfiction. And I think, as I said earlier, that was a real awakening for me, and especially stylistically, because my style very much changed when I started writing nonfiction, became much more direct and kind of like the way I talk in general. I think I'm not much of a talker in real life. Um, but I think that willingness to try different genres has and probably also to have a thick skin. It's good to have a thick skin in this game. Um, and to just keep moving forward. There's no I don't I'm lucky I've never encountered writer's block. I just think you just got to sit down every day and do what you can, and something good will come of it if you just keep plugging away.
I'm amazed you've never encountered writer's block. How do you achieve that?
I just don't stop. I get up every day. I'm an everyday person. I tell my students, and in these workshops I do, it's been a great help to me to prioritize my life. You know, one is family, and two is work, and 3 is art, and 4 is like staying in shape. And, after that is the abyss, and so that helps me to, like get up early. I'd rather get up early and work rather than, sleep in a little bit. I'd rather work in the evening than watch TV. I get antsy, if I'm not working. So, um, yeah, I think for me, and I'm not saying that people don't get writer's block. I'm not saying that at all. But I think for me, it's just a matter of, okay, if this isn't going anywhere, I have other projects. I'm always juggling projects.
Mhm.
There's always something waiting. So if something's not working, I can put it down for a while and I'll come back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my last questions, I know you mentioned teaching. It's one thing to write, and then it's another to help other people learn to write or teach them a craft about writing. What have you, I guess, has teaching others helped you in your own writing? Has it opened more like questions for you? Like, I guess what has kind of been the trade-off there? Do you think it impacts?
That's a good question. For most of my career, like 33 years, I taught like at a high school, but I
Hmm.
didn't teach writing. I worked with special needs students. But now that I teach college, I do teach a lot of creative writing, and I think it's been really helpful to me. I think it's really helped me, solidify, what I believe in my process, and to also be open to, different ways of doing this. And I'm very open to, sharing with students. There's so many ways to do this, and it's as unique as we are. And I've learned, to try different processes other than my own, to varying degrees of success. Oftentimes I'll try to plunge into something and then it will devolve into planning, but it got me somewhere I might not have gone otherwise. So I think looking at literature and examining it and looking at, you know, how to present it to other people, just putting it into language helps me when I sit down in my own private time to write.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for all your time today. I just wanted to ask before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to add that I didn't touch on? Anything you want to promote coming up? Anything like that?
Um, my calendar as far as promoting, I do have a couple things, but most of them are like some college gigs up in the Philly area. One in the Allentown area at the Sales MFA program, and I'll be reading at the Rosemont MFA program. Um, Doing some podcasts, like this, that seems to be the way to go these days.
Mhm.
So I'm learning, and I appreciate the time that you
Of
took to
course.
talk with me. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Curtis, thank you so much again for joining us today. For more content like this, check out the links in our description below to our website, brownbaglit.com, and to our social media handles. See you next time for the next edition of Lattes and Lit.